Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Naruto was in the 7 Ninja Swordsman, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist. To see more, comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Zabuza and each of the remaining swordsmen along with May watched in stunned silence as the commander's hands glowed a very bright green. With precision they had never imagined him to possess, Naruto carefully removed the rock shards embedded into Mangetsu's shoulder before sealing the wound. He didn't just stop there, as he even recreated the bone and skin, making the entire thing vanish, as if it never existed in the first place. Haku sobbed in relief when she heard Mangetsu's whisper of peace. She then looked at the focused man who was doing everything in his power to keep the boy amongst the world of living. Why go so far? She couldn't help but ask in a whisper. Naruto looked up even as his hands continued to heal the last of the wound and was surprised to see the entire squad having the very same question in their eyes. He looked back at Mangetsu and thought about the question. As a spy, he was never supposed to reveal the true extent of his powers. Even if he had not revealed everything, he had crossed a line for the boy currently breathing heavily in his arms. For a moment, he saw Nagato's face staring back at him, which made him smile. He looked back at his comrades, and even if the faces were different now, the feeling in his heart still remained the same and was the one which made him realize the answer. Because he's one of us, he answered resolutely. Haku and May truly smiled on hearing him say that, but he saw the others who were more battle-hardened were yet to comprehend the full extent of his reasoning. All of us are different in many ways, but we are a team. We are Kiri's finest warriors entrusted with our nation's future, but most importantly all we have right now is each other. We're family, said Naruto, a fierce determination present in his eyes which earned him a soft gaze of understanding from Amayuri and Jinpachi. There's no such thing as family, refused Zabuza with a growl, remembering all he had been taught in order to survive. All he had done to survive, including his own classmates in the academy. He couldn't. We are now. He flinched on hearing Naruto's unwavering answer and felt something unfamiliar in his heart on seeing the look in the blonde's fierce gaze. Family always betrays, whispered Kisame hesitantly, memories of his own dark past coming back to haunt him. Naruto lowered his gaze on hearing him say that, knowing a part of it was true considering who he was in reality. He had no right to preach about family to the people he was spying on in the first place. But he had seen the way quite a few of them had given up on Mangetsu so easily when things went south, and as commander he was responsible for the success of the mission. And it would never succeed unless each member of the squad knew that they could rely on their comrades without a doubt. Maybe they will someday, he agreed with Kisame, making the older man look at him with a frown. Then why? He asked seriously. You don't give up on family, no matter what, answered Naruto truthfully, as he looked at Mangetsu. He saw Zabuza and Kisame still didn't agree with his opinion, but they were thinking about what he had said, which was more than enough. Even he couldn't undo years of gruesome training these men had undergone in a few moments, but he had shown them a different path through his actions. May watched Naruto gently lift Mangetsu over his shoulder as he stood up and glanced at the rest of the mountain above them with a determined gaze. She looked at Haku, followed by Jinpachi and Amayuri. She was pleased to see the same feelings present in each of the gazes. Even Zabuza and Kisame looked a little shaken. She looked back at the man who was winning their trust ever slowly. There was nobody who doubted he was a fine soldier and a good commander, but the way he fought for Mangetsu and put himself on the line had showed him the kind of man he truly was. What's the next move, Commander? Naruto looked back at his squad and was pleased to see a renewed determination burning in their eyes. More importantly, he saw the way most of them wanted to trust him after what he did for one of their own. We climb the rest of this mountain, then establish a makeshift camp and scout the area for more intel. When we have that in place, we strike, instructed the commander. Commander, we cannot afford any more accidents. We are with you, but climbing further exposes us to the same risk that hurt Mangetsu in the first place, warned Haku seriously, earning a nod from the blonde man. I'll carry you all to the top in one shot with my teleportation technique. Considering the height, air pressure, all of your weight and the distance, my chakra will almost get exhausted. If there are enemies waiting for us at the top, I wouldn't be of much help for some time until my chakra level rises again, explained Naruto hesitantly. It's still a better plan than risking each one of us climbing the rest of the way. Besides, you've done more than enough so far for us, we'll have your back up there against anything, promised Haku fiercely. This time there was no hesitation as the entire squad nodded their consent and looked resolutely back at Naruto. He looked at them for a moment before giving an affirmative nod as they then gathered all around him, placing their hands over his backs. Ninja wire on your kunai. Be ready to hit the nearest trees or rocks to create an anchor and use it to establish your position on the top. You'll have 5 seconds to make it happen, don't miss, he warned them. He could see everyone was a little nervous, but they were committed to the mission and gave their firm nod of consent, which was all he needed to see. When they all looked ready, he expanded his sensory powers and located the highest tri-pronged kunai he had managed to establish across the mountain. Even from that point, it was another 500 feet to the top, one that he would have to cover in a few seconds. It was not going to be easy. Mei only had a moment to blink when she saw Naruto giving a final nod before her entire world squeezed. Words couldn't describe the sensation as she felt her entire self being crushed to the size of a small rock before being pushed through a dark space she could barely see before her eyes widened in horror. Around her, she saw their entire squad had appeared in the air amidst the clouds. She barely had time to admire the clouds before that nauseous feeling took over once again as she saw Naruto throw a sharp object up higher. Again and again they were all violently crushed and pulled until Mei felt herself ready to puke her guts out. Her eyes widened when they suddenly flashed against the edge of the mountain top and she realized this was the moment they had all been waiting for. Despite their claims of pulling their weight once they reached the top, the entire squad was extremely disoriented from the rapid travel. It was hard enough to breathe and even more harder not to just puke your guts out from that horrible nausea. Naruto must have anticipated this event, as another clone of him appeared above them all and threw a single 3-pronged kunai that embedded itself into the nearest rock with a solid grip. Mei again felt that nauseous sensation and before she knew it every one of them was safely back on the ground with the faint puff of the clone disappearing echoing from behind them. She looked up to see Naruto taking a few deep breaths as his Sage Mode power suddenly vanished and without a word, he collapsed unconscious to the ground. Commander. 3 weeks later, Kirigakure. Ino silently stared at the short clip in her hand. She had been looking at it for a good long 5 minutes now and even then her eyes were not willing to tear themselves away from the 2 positive signs displayed on the medical device. It was not as if she had not imagined this event never happening in her life. Every woman at least thought about this once in her life. Her feelings on this subject at the present were conflicted to say the least. She needed a second opinion, one that was more rational and could help her look at the bigger picture because even if she appeared calm on the outside, she was having a crisis in her heart. One which she didn't want her commander standing in front of her to notice. This is bad, whispered Tsukumo, the acting leader of all Konoha agents in the Land of Water. He flinched on his inappropriate choice of words when he received a scathing glare from one of his most prized operatives. The raw hatred that came in her eyes scared him to the point that he raised his hands in a placating manner. Any word from him yet? Asked Tsukumo, trying to change the subject if only for his own safety. No, she whispered, her sadness and fears easy for him to see. He's the father, isn't he? Asked Tsukumo gently. Any other woman would have been offended on hearing such an intimate question being asked, but in their line of work, it was not unusual for operatives to use S as a weapon against their targets to get the information they needed. Naruto and Ino were no different to this rule. Although Tsukumo was pleased when she nodded her confirmation to his question of Naruto being the father. Naruto was a good man and a good ninja, but he thought from the heart unlike Ino who had a better sense of understanding. He doubted the last Namikaze would be capable enough of raising a child considering his own dark past and the nature of the current assignment, much less the child of another man. Even if they both denied it, Tsukumo knew these two loved each other. It was not a love born of pure passion or lust, although that might still exist. In reality, it was a love born from the shared pain, sense of duty and respect they had for each other. I'm scared, Tsukumo, she whispered. He stepped beside her and placed his hand over her shoulder in a comforting manner. Whatever your decision, I will make sure the Hokage and the higher-ups accept it. I will not let them have their say in this. He promised fiercely, and he meant it. If that young brat Hiruzen and his advisors didn't heed his advice, then they would know how bad it was in reality to piss of a group of special ops ninjas. Granted, there were not that many of them in existence to stage any decent revolt, but they were a small group that looked out for each other, even if it meant making those in leaderships get their heads in the right place. His promise served to dismiss most of Ino's fears. The fact that she hugged him and sobbed in relief showed no matter their training, operatives could get compromised if feelings got involved, which was the case with her and Naruto clearly. I take it this means you are not dropping the child? He asked in a fatherly tone, adding as much warmth to ease her fears. Not my choice, but, she whispered, and Tsukumo knew exactly what terrified her the most. She was scared of Naruto and what he would do with this change in their lives. In one way, it could bolster their cover and embed them deeper into Kirigakure's society. Many opportunistic clans had been trying to get the daughters married off to Naruto ever since they discovered him to be the last survivor of the Namikaze clan. They didn't even care that he was already married to Ino, citing Kirigakure's lax laws that allowed ninja clan heads to have multiple wives, for the sake of the clan. It was a hypocritical law, but one accepted by the government and upheld by the water daimyo who practiced it himself with his multiple consorts. It was only Naruto's evasion of this entire matter that kept those clans at bay, especially the Kaguya. With this child, many of those people would be forced to take a step back. Many would still try, but Naruto could argue he had started doing his part by repopulating the Namikaze clan. It also allowed Konoha more leverage over Naruto. Maybe with this they could make him switch his loyalty to their village instead of Izu. Their village needed a powerful ninja like Naruto, and the prospect of the Namikaze clan being reborn in Konoha would add strength to their village's military. Although that created a big problem in the present for Tsukumo. What will you do now? I doubt his covert mission will get over any time soon, and the more you wait, he warned her hesitantly. I will not make a decision without informing him, she objected fiercely. She could not do that to him, not after everything he had lost. He trusted her with his life and more. The very least she could do was wait for him to return so they could both decide on what was the right course of action. Then you need to resign from the Anbu group, weeding out the spies of various nations in Kiri's ranks, said Tsukumo seriously. No, Ino. Tsukumo, they are not to be underestimated. Have you forgotten what they have done in the past 3 weeks alone? Asked Ino fiercely. Tsukumo flinched. The Anbu commander had formed a special team that was investigating every branch of Kiri's military for possible spies. Nobody was spared, no matter what clan, rank or political connection they had. The spies from Konoha had so far been kept well protected from the lens thanks to Ino being a part of that team and diverting their attention to other spies. They had already found spies from Iwagakure and Sunagakure. The former had been working as a medic and the latter had been working as a secretary in the Mizukage's tower. Suffice to say, both of them were after brutality and interrogation at the hands of the Anbu unit supervised by their commander. It didn't stop there, as the same unit then hunted down the entire families, friends, even few acquaintances associated with those two spies from Iwa and Suna. The fact that they even killed the Iwa Kanoiki's 4-year-old son in cold blood made the goals very clear. It was an absolute purge and nobody was going to be spared. As a person, Tsukumo was worried for Ino and her safety. Even more now that he knew she was pregnant with a child, it was not safe for her to hang around those trigger-happy monsters. On the other hand, the commander inside him knew how vital an asset she was. Without her misguiding the Anbu forces, their spies could be exposed. And she knew that, no matter the situation, I am still Ino Yamanaka of the Leaf, she promised him, the loyalty and determination in her fierce blue eyes making him swell with pride. I cannot step aside and risk the lives of my comrades, not if I have the power to save them. I have to stay on that unit to keep you all safe, she pointed out, earning a tired sigh from him. They are dangerous men, Ino. Don't ever forget that. If something happens to you and this child, warned Tsukumo. They won't do anything to me, for they know Naruto will burn them in the deepest fires of hell if they even try to lay a finger on me. Considering the way the Mizukage favors Naruto, he would be the first one to protect me should my loyalty ever be questioned by the Anbu unit, explained Ino rationally. Tsukumo couldn't deny the merits in her argument. By now, Naruto had established a small cult-like status for himself in Kirigakure. Most of the civilian population loved him and the shinobi respected him. The fact that the Mizukage considered him one of the candidates to succeed him in the future showed how well Izu's spy had embedded himself into this society. Everyone had seen a glimpse of Naruto's power. Even the Anbu commander would think 1,000 times before accusing Naruto's own wife to be a spy, much less take any action against her. But there was still a lot of dangers and he didn't like it. In the end, he chose what was best for the group and hoped he didn't come to regret it later. Fine, I'll leave what to do with this child to you and Naruto. You can continue to be part of the Anbu team investigating the spies, but also continue reporting everything to me. Even if you feel paranoid about something, I want to know everything, instructed Tsukumo seriously. I understand. Thank you, said Ino with a relieved smile, but frowned when she saw Tsukumo massaged his forehead with a tired sigh. I don't think you do, not all of it. It's true you are relatively safe and Kiri won't question your loyalty without sufficient proof, but if anything did happen to you, then Naruto knows about most of our spies, including me. He left it at that, hoping she would understand what he was hinting at, and she did instantly. He would never betray his village or Konoha. We are allies, objected Ino, taking personal offense that her superior would even suggest such a thing, not after all Naruto had done for them his entire life. Tsukumo just stared at her calmly. It would seem she didn't know Naruto's full history. It was why she could not see what Tsukumo and the other higher-ups could. It gave them great nightmares every once in a while just thinking about it. Tsukumo respected Naruto, or he should say Minato, which was the young man's true birth name. He hadn't come across any ninja in his life that had so much for their village and still keep fighting for it. There was no question about his courage, skill or loyalty. But the man had seen too much, lost everything until Ino came into his life. Naruto had walked the path of darkness for a very long time, and no matter how strong an operative, there always came a breaking point. Tsukumo prayed he would never have to see such a day, as that would be his worst nightmare. Operatives like Naruto were the shadows that kept the peace in this world, but could also very well become the ghosts that started another war. He did not reveal his feelings or information about the man to Ino though, as she would not understand. Instead, he warned her to be careful and left her house already deciding on assigning an extra pair of eyes to watch over her and do what was needed if she was ever exposed. Tobirama had been very clear on that. Tsukumo looked at the dark sky and couldn't help but wonder how difficult a life in the shadows always was. Land of Lightning. Naruto sat atop his tree branch in the thick forest atop the mountain. Heavy rains continued to fall down from the skies as he looked at his other squad mate hiding in an adjacent tree in a similar position. Both of them were neatly camouflaged and not visible to the eye. They had also suppressed their chakra signatures to a minimum so as not to get detected by the enemy. Zabuza did not like what he was witnessing. Almost every member of their squad, sans Mangetsu who was recovering, had joined Naruto in the daily recon missions in order to estimate the enemy's strength as well as the exact location of their target. Let's reconcile our findings, suggested Naruto in a whisper, earning a nod from his partner. There are around 4 castles in the immediate vicinity guarded by nearly 2,000-3,000 enemy forces. They are spread out equally and there is a large no man's land between each of the castles and their approaching roads. It's almost impossible to sneak inside undetected considering the detection barriers, regular patrols. Even if we somehow get past all of that, we still don't know the exact location of our target. Our interrogation of few patrol officers didn't reveal any fruitful insight on the same, recited Zabuza meticulously with a heavy frown. They had been careful to alter the memories of those they had interrogated in order to keep their cover and had just sent them back to their duties to prevent any further suspicion. The enemy was already on high alert since they had discovered the silence from their border patrols beneath the mountain and had tightened their security. We could go for an aerial insertion, but we'll get detected right away. And if we land in the wrong castle where the target is absent, we lose our only chance of doing our job. You were not kidding when you meant this was a mission, muttered Zabuza with a scoff. The mission still stands, pointed Naruto, earning a low growl of frustration from his partner. I know that. I just don't see how we can get past them all to reach our target without raising any alarm, argued Zabuza with a tired sigh. Naruto accepted his partner's analysis even as he took out a lone cigarette from his pouch and ignited it with ease. As he took in the first puff of smoke that relaxed him greatly, he saw Zabuza staring at him petulantly. With a faint grin, he produced another one of his reserve cigarettes and tossed it to Zabuza, who gave him a shark-like grin in return. They both smoked in silence for a few minutes as they pondered over the dilemma. Even Naruto was at a loss for ideas. The harsh truth was that they would be detected if they tried to infiltrate through stealth. That would make them lose what little advantage they had and put his entire team on the risk of annihilation. There was only one way left now. We split up into two teams. Team 1 made up of 3 members acting as diversion unit that will draw majority of the enemy's forces by getting into a deliberate fight with the border patrols. Team 2 made up of 4 members will use the chaos to sneak behind enemy lines. It would be easier to detect the target in this chaos as the security forces try to safeguard the VIP and his family into the most heavily fortified place, suggested Naruto. It's risky, but I don't see any other choice. Team 1 should be made up of our strongest fighters as they will be under a lot of pressure, even risk getting eliminated first. Team 2 should be made up of those of us more adept at stealth and quickness to seek and destroy the target, pointed Zabuza. He looked at his leader and saw in those intelligent eyes that the blonde man had already decided who would take part in which operation, but his silence was enough to show he wanted Zabuza to arrive at his own conclusion as well. I think, Kisum, you and May should be Team 1. The 3 of you are the heavy hitters of our team, the rest of us can sneak in and destroy the target along with his family. But if we commit the entire team to this plan, there is no one left as backup to rescue us or send word of our capture in worst case. We would be or worse by the time our village sends reinforcements, if they ever do. It's already been more than stipulated time than what we planned, warned Zabuza seriously. That's a risk we will have to take. We have come too far just to turn back and go home now, decided Naruto, as he finished his smoke, and it seemed Zabuza also had enough of the same as they both quickly destroyed their cigarettes to ash and let it get absorbed in the atmosphere. In that case, let's go and brief the others. They won't like it, suggested Zabuza, as he got up from his perch. You go ahead and finish briefing them on the plan. I'll erase any trace of our presence here, ordered Naruto strictly. Zabuza nodded before he vanished into a puff of smoke which Naruto dispersed quickly before focusing on the enemy stronghold. In truth, he was not sure of his plan but had limited options to complete the mission. He could not give up now when he was the one who pushed for this mission in the first place to the Mizukage. What made him curious was the fact that he had received intel about this hideout area directly from Izu's network. Of course, they had routed it through Kiri spies located in the Land of Lightning to dispose any suspicion but had informed Naruto of the development on this matter. As far as he was aware, Izu had very limited presence of their agents in the Land of Lightning and he doubted any of them were entrenched well enough to locate the secret hideout of the daimyo during a time of war. It could only be possible if someone within the daimyo's circle betrayed him. But who? He whispered out loud. He tensed and immediately unleashed the sword placed at his back, turning around only to come face to face with a female Kunoichi standing at a few treetops away from him. She was wearing a light gray-colored full-sleeve shirt covered by a similar colored flak jacket complemented by dark black pants and combat boots. There was a standard katana placed at her back and a small pouch for kunai and shuriken strapped at her thighs. Her face was covered behind a black mask similar to an anbu, while the Kumo headband was wrapped around her left arm protectively. Her bright red hair were neatly tied in a bun atop her head and her calm violet eyes looked at him without any surprise or alarm. Their weapons clashed in a mighty blow as several sparks flew in the cold night. He narrowed his eyes when he saw the playful mirth visible in her gaze before she disengaged from their duel and jumped away to another tree. He was about to follow through with his attack when he suddenly froze. She had removed her pitch-black face mask and was now looking at him with a mixture of joy and sadness. If there was any doubt in his heart, it was removed when she clenched her fist and thumped it against her C while standing at full attention. Most people would not understand this gesture, but he did. For he had been the one to create this salute. A tradition he had passed on to only a select few people in this world and she had been one of them. It's been a while, Captain Minato. He stared at the woman standing before him, his heart unable to believe her to be real. For the last 10 years, she had been a ghost that had haunted his heart. A whisper in his dreams, a reminder of what he had lost. She was an S, just like him. A Spartan. The only one apart from him who probably survived the nearly 10 years ago. Kushina, he whispered in disbelief and faint hope in his shaky voice. He remembered a young teenage girl, almost the same age as him with a fiery temper. She had never been one of the heavy hitters, but her skill with fuinjutsu, sensory ability, and B-traps surpassed his own by many degrees. Her healing prowess had been the best among all Spartans, even better than his own. Most importantly, she could completely suppress her chakra, making her invisible to any sensor ninjas, even him. Ghost. That had been her codename among the Spartans, whom the world commonly knew as the S-program ninjas. Only the Uzumaki knew what the full form of that program truly was apart from the ones in it. Not even Konoha knew much about them and only discovered the truth after Hashirama's rescue at the hands of the Spartans. 99, she replied back with a faint smile, confirming her unique number among the company's size former Spartan unit of more than 120 ninjas. 47, he confirmed back his own unique number, earning a faint nod of acknowledgement from her. He found himself hopping through trees as she did the same before they both met in a fierce embrace in the dark forest bombarded by heavy rains. A lone tear fell from his eye, followed by a relieved chuckle as he hugged her more tightly across his sea, a part of him afraid of her vanishing if he let go of her. She felt his surprise on that gesture and his clear hesitance, but he made no move to stop her. She broke the case soon after, knowing he was probably overwhelmed. After all, nobody expected him to remain composed if his former partner, girlfriend, was revealed to be alive after nearly 10 years of that. How? He whispered, still looking surprised. She gave him a nod of consent, making him activate his red eyes once more, the sight of which brought back a lot of memories for her. A moment later, he saw the answer to his question in her memories. Flashback, 10 years ago. Kushina groaned in pain as she aimlessly stared at the pitch-black sky above her, shrouded by dark clouds. The heavy silence around her bore painfully over her heart, as did the sight of the corpses of her fellow Spartans laid around her. Her only solace was the sight of hundreds of Kumogakure ninja mixed among the which was enough proof of the valiant fight the Spartans put up. However, in the end it was not ninja that decimated the special ops forces of Azu. She gave the most hateful glare to the monstrous two tails raging a few kilometers away from her and the one who sent her comrades to the graves. If not for that beast, this battlefield would have been the grave of Kumogakure's entire force. The bastards had seen how outmatched they were, and the casualties they suffered at the hands of the Spartans forced them to bring their weapons of mass destruction to the front lines in order to defeat similar weapons launched by Azu. Spartans. She had been barely able to heal the large hole in her stomach courtesy of the rocks that had been launched at them by the tailed beast. Some of her ribs were still broken and would take time to heal, but she would probably survive. Her comrades weren't so lucky. She smiled on hearing the tailed beast scream and made herself at peace when she saw a dark, yellow flash attacking the monster. We leave the rest to you, Captain. They all had kept the promise they had made to their leader until the very end. Now it was time to rest, they had done the duty. She lay in the beast-soaked ground, but before she could resign herself to the approaching darkness, she saw the severed head of Echo just a few feet away from her. Anger surged through Kushina as she remembered Echo had been one of the youngest of the group. A boy of 12. Now he was just a severed head lacking the rest of his body, with his eyes still wide open and looking at her. Kushina stared into those lifeless eyes and couldn't help but feel they were demanding something from her. She looked around at the corpses of her other comrades and felt the same feeling magnify in her heart. Justice. Her comrades were her village had suffered, her clan had went through so much death and pain. Her gaze landed upon Kumogakure Junin, more specifically at the headband wrapped around his forehead. Once again, she had a purpose again as she dragged herself to the cover of the nearby forest, where she found more corpses of the enemy left behind by her comrades. Most of the enemy force had used the tailed beast as a diversion and used its power to escape the wrath of the Spartans. Kushina identified a badly mutilated corpse of a young Kumogakure female Kunoiki of Chunin rank. They were both of the same age and body build, even had the same colored hair. She switched her uniform with the girls, and with the little sensory power she had left, she located the retreating enemy forces and made her decision. She looked back at the battlefield to see the tailed beast screaming in agony as Minato butchered it without any shred of mercy in his heart. For a moment, she hesitated, knowing Minato would need her, especially now that Nagato was But then she saw the other Spartans who lay on the battlefield and knew she had to avenge them. She doubted the Azukage would reform their unit ever again. The village had undergone quite a scandal when their unit was formed, with many people not comfortable with the brutality the children who survived the program had endured during training, and so many others in the process. It was only the resounding military victories that the Spartans brought for the village later in the war that made the people accept their existence and grudgingly acknowledge the Azukage's decision. Most of all, Kushina felt that Kumogakur would not be deterred even if they lost this war. They would probably stir up more wars in the future once again. A ninja village was only as strong as the support it received from the feudal lord, the daimyo. If there was to be any peace in this world, any justice for her comrades, she had to make the man responsible for this entire war pay for his crimes in B. And she could never achieve all of that if she returned back home. She looked back at Minato, knowing her decision would end the future they could ever have, a future she had dearly desired for a long time. It would haunt her till her last breath. But she was a Spartan first, just like him. Family, duty, honor. Those were their clan's words, and Kushina believed in them with all her heart. The Spartans had been her family, and it was her duty to honor their by getting them justice. Tears fell from her eyes as she turned around and slowly limped in the direction of the retreating enemy forces. Flashback end. Kushina carefully gauged his reaction as he finished witnessing her memories and the choice she had made on that fateful night. Over the years, she had imagined a variety of reactions from him on learning the truth, but never had she expected a calm nod, albeit with some sadness in his eyes. "You did what you thought was right," he whispered sadly. "You don't resent me for leaving you behind? Nearly going rogue?" she asked carefully, but he shook his head. "We are not kids anymore, Kushina. You were right, the Spartans were gone after that night. Even with the two of us, our unit would never be resurrected. Although it was dangerous, it was best that you went after the ones responsible for the death of our friends. I doubt the villagers would be kind to you if you had returned with me while all the others perished," he explained with a nod of acknowledgement sent towards her. She had also shown him memories of her infiltrating Kumo's military and working her way towards the royal court of the daimyo over the past decade. She had re-established contact with Azu's intelligence command when she was settled. They had been furious but couldn't forego the benefit of having a highly skilled Spartan among their arch-enemy's top ranks. Their decision to not punish her worked in their favor, as she gave them critical intel over the years that helped save many lives, including the one of Tobirama Senju. She was a part of the Anbu team from Kumo tasked with protecting the Lightning Daimyo and his family. They were privy to a lot of confidential information that the Raikage reported to his feudal lord by examining his letters for security before passing them to the feudal lord or attending their private meetings as part of the daimyo's security detail, as the feudal lord was intimidated by the fearsome Raikage. When she had learned of Tobirama's survival and captivity, she had passed that intel to Azu. They had been very careful and had actually used Kiri's eagerness for war to make Minato convince them to attack the Land of Lightning. It was for the best, as Tobirama was relatively safe, although now a prisoner of Kiri, but she had faith that Minato would get the man back to his village somehow. If it had been Konoha or Azu forces attacking the city of Osaka, then the Land of Lightning would know for sure that there was a spy hidden in their top ranks. But since it had been Kiri who attacked, it was just brushed off as an unexpected collateral damage. Even now, she had been the one to reveal the daimyo's secret hideout, but had not expected such a small team to be assigned for the job. She had observed Minato and the other swordsmen from Kiri. While there was no doubt they were powerful, but the odds were stacked against them. It was why she stepped in to help, and for the fact that she had to meet the man she had loved all those years ago. Maybe a part of her still did, but she doubted whether he felt the same. It had been nearly 10 years. "What you did was at least better than trying to commit like I did," he excused with a miserable laugh. Kushina was truly saddened on hearing him say that. She had known about what he had been up to all these years. That had been one of her conditions in exchange for vital information to Azu, as apart from her feelings for him, he was also the only Spartan still alive. Both of them were a dying breed, and she wanted to look after one of her own in whatever way she could. "The village shouldn't have ostracized and blamed you like they did. You did the best you could," said Kushina honestly, earning a surprised look from him. "You know?" he asked with a shocked stare, making her give a hesitant nod. "I kept tabs on you." "Sorry," she whispered sheepishly, making him sigh. "You're such a nerd, you know that." Kushina's eyebrows twitched on hearing that blasted nickname he had given her. He had caught her peeping on him taking a bath once and suddenly she deserved that name. She was about to respond back with her own retort when she saw him staring at her happily with a smile. I'm glad you are alive, Kushina. She hugged him once again before both of them settled on one of the tree tops after doing a scan of the area for any intruders. Fortunately they found none. Kushina doubted any could get past her sensory abilities. The closest enemy presence was nearly 3 kilometers away. Naruto stared at his former comrade and could not help but be relieved. Her survival lifted a great burden off his shoulders, for it proved he didn't get all of his men killed. The fact that she was a close friend made him feel a lot better. Knowing she was there to help him with this mission even further bolstered his confidence in his ability to get the job done. What happened to you, Minato? She asked gently, knowing he would understand her question was directly related to the reasoning behind his attempt to commit S. What had happened to the Spartans was a tragedy of the highest order. The fact that his little brother, who was his last family, also on that battlefield was heartbreaking. But they were Spartans, they were supposed to fight till the end. But he nearly gave up and she wanted to understand why. Watched my friends my Nagato You think that would be the worst part? He whispered sadly, as tears pulled up in his eyes as memories of that fateful night came rushing back. Kushina grasped his hand with her own, knowing exactly what the Spartans were to him. It was the same with her. But you didn't realized Kushina sadly, as she understood he had wanted to alongside his men. Instead, he was left all alone. She had heard that he had visited the families of each of the Spartans, even those who were orphans. For them, he went to their respective orphanages and talked to anyone who knew or cared about those lost young children. He would have seen the devastation and pain with his own eyes, experienced their anger and their hate for him to have survived while their loved ones didn't. Even after everything he had been through in his life, Minato had stood strong, but in the end he was also human and that pain was too much for a 14-year-old boy. I hope they remember you, said Kushina with a fierce determination in her eyes, for this man had endured so much for their people his entire life and would continue to until his end. His eyes widened on hearing her words, and when he looked in her eyes, he saw nothing but pure respect and admiration for him. As someone who could relate to him better than anyone in this world, her words were his salvation from the past. What if we lose again? He asked in a trembling voice, his worst fears unable to remain hidden from her. She gave him the most peaceful smile he had ever seen in his entire life. Then we'll do that together too. He leaned in and captured her lips with his own, pouring all the growth he felt for her. He remembered the days he had spent squabbling with her, getting on her nerves, the days when she visited his parents' graves with him, the night he took her out for their first date and the moment of midnight when he had first killed her, all their training and missions, him telling her about his dream of having a family of their own someday, the way she had blushed and whispered that she wanted the same thing. The life they could have had. Tears fell from Kushina's eyes as she knew how long she had waited for this moment, all the years she had spent blaming herself for leaving him behind, and now knowing what he went through, she wanted nothing more than to hold him in her arms and keep him away from all the pain in this world. To fill his heart with happiness, to make him live the peace he deserved. To fulfill his dream of having a family of his own, a dream that she desired as well. When he finally broke the K, she just stared into his blue eyes. Till the end. He couldn't help but remember the first time he had heard that promise. Flashback, nearly 15 years ago. He gingerly opened his eyes only to find himself floating in water. Before panic could overtake him, he realized he was still breathing and there was something stuffed down his mouth down to his sea. It was a tube which was probably giving him oxygen. He looked around and found himself in a tube full of water with various cables attached to different parts of his body. Gazing out further, he saw there were hundreds of such similar tubes all around him. All full of young children and a handful teenagers, boys and girls as him. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw his little brother floating in a tube just beside him. Judging from the rise and fall of his sea meant he was alive but asleep. Almost everyone else in the tubes was in a similar state, which left him alone. He tried to close his eyes and go back to sleep, knowing there was no going back, and he was the one that chose this path, which made Nagato follow in his footsteps despite his stern opposition, but his brother was anything but stubborn. He was quite surprised when he heard a faint muffle. He frantically looked around until his gaze found a thin redhead girl floating in one of the tubes near him. Her eyes were looking at him, and as both the gazes met, he saw the same resolve that was in his heart prevalent in her eyes as well. He led his head in confusion when she extended her small hand outwards in her tube, making water swirl until it was vaguely forming something. Kushina. A feeling of happiness washed over him as he realized she was telling him what her name was, and if that faint grin on her face was any indication, she wanted to be a friend. He easily twisted the water inside his own tube until it crudely displayed his own name to her. Minato. She nodded at him slightly and used her hands to again write something which warmed his heart. You'll stay with me. If not for his shinobi training, he would have panicked and from claustrophobia on seeing where he was trapped currently. It had the makings of a horror tale, and any sane person would desire not to be alone in this nightmare. Even he was glad that there was someone awake right now like him, as he didn't want to imagine how he would have felt if everybody else had been asleep and he had been alone. He bobbed his head a little, indicating his consent to her request. She again used her hands to write a message that struck something deep inside of him. Till the end. They all had signed their agreements which saved the village from any responsibility if anything happened to them during this training. They had virtually all signed their own death warrants, and that was not something anybody could ever forget, especially young children. They were all alone out here, off from their families, by people they didn't know. Possibly they would even in these secret labs without ever feeling the sunlight or seeing their village or loved ones again. It was a somber thought. He would never let Nagato experience that loneliness, as he would be there for his little brother until there was a single breath inside of him. He looked at all the other children and knew they all wanted to protect Azu just like him, and had risked it all to protect their village. He would be there for them too, if they ever needed him. He looked at Kushina and thumped his hand against his sea right over his heart, even as the water twisted to his will, forming the words she wanted to hear. Their promise. Till the end. Kushina smiled truly as she mirrored him by thumping her hand over her heart, vowing to uphold the same promise. Few days later. In a dark room, a young boy screamed. He thrashed against the straps and metal clamps holding his arms and legs as the tubes attached to his body pumped the dreaded fluids into him. The pain was all-consuming. Words couldn't describe how it felt to feel each and every bone inside your body hardening and becoming more stronger with every passing second. The feeling of eyesight suddenly becoming twice as sharp, your ears slowly being able to pick up more subtle sounds previously unheard of. The sensation of each and every chakra pore inside your body activating at the same time and glow like 1,000 suns. The horror of watching your body change in height, weight and shape right before your very eyes as two strangers dressed in white lab coats observed you from a safe room in front of you. If he focused more, he could hear similar screams coming from nearby labs where he knew more children his age were undergoing the same pain. The thought of his brother being put through this, terrified and alone strapped to a metallic bed. No, doctor, this boy, he heard the male lab coat whisper in awe, even as Minato's struggle against the restraints binding him intensified. Remarkable. His sight, sense of hearing, reflexes and strength have increased nearly thrice against an average shinobi. It's as if his body was made to accept these genetic modifications. None of the other subjects have shown so much potential, said the female redhead doctor, as she looked directly at him. Maybe it's because of the Uchiha and Senju DNA inside of him. His chakra levels were already more than most Chunin even before the surgery. Now he's becoming the super soldier our village needs, commented the male lab assistant. It better. We have already lost nearly 50% of the subjects during the genetic enhancement surgeries, said the female head doctor disappointedly. Horror engulfed his heart as he heard what these people just said. He remembered being surrounded by nearly 300 young children these past few days. They were undergoing intense physical training, special warfare lessons, mathematics, geography and combat medical procedures. Each and every one of them had shown great potential, including Nagato and Kushina, who were the closest thing he had to a family. He was on friendly terms with the other kids as well. Now half of them were He was no stranger to death, but this news was a devastating shock, but one which served to make his will to save his brother even more prominent. He could feel his chakra reserves increasing, his bone strength magnifying as his body underwent drastic changes. Apparently, This resistance was not something the scientists had not thought about, as binding seals were quickly applied across his body, sapping off large portions of his energy. He collapsed to the bed completely exhausted, his breathing heavy, as the female doctor finally stepped into the room and appeared beside him. "Your anger reminds me of the tales of the nine-tailed fox's rage. But you did well today, 47, she said calmly, without any guilt or sadness in her voice, even if her surgeries came nearly half of his comrades. Most of all, these scientists never called any of them by the names but only by the code numbers each of them were given. It was probably their way of distancing themselves from the fact that they were Eon and K children. My brother," he groaned in pain and desperation. "Survived. He's also a remarkable specimen and will do wonders in the future. Rest for now, 47, because when you wake up, you will be Fox." She gave him that name out of her twisted and despicable sense of humor, but he didn't care. All that mattered was that his brother had survived, Kushina would have as well. He felt darkness approaching and swore he would not let the S of those who S today go in vain. In the end, it was Kushina's words that he remembered even as darkness took him. Till the end. Few months later, Captain Reika Uzumaki stood alongside her group of elite Junin and skilled Chunin guarding Tsukushima Hill near their village's coastal borders. They had been ordered to defend this hilltop specifically by the Azukage and had been told to expect an attack from friendly forces. Apparently, this was to be live fire training exercise with a new unit of their village. The fact that S-Force had been authorized was enough to make anyone's doubt disappear. "Captain, we are ready," reported her second-in-command, squad leader Mitsuo. Reika observed the map in her hand. The base of the mountain was a simple grass field a few kilometers inland from the sea. Apart from placing 2 squads on the sea coast as lookouts, she had established twin trench lines at the base of the hill, followed by heavily fortified foxholes at various strategic locations in the hill all the way to the top. She didn't expect their fellow allies to make this exercise a piece of cake, but she doubted they could win. "Rumors say we might be going up against the S," whispered Mitsuo hesitantly, his voice only audible enough for her to hear, unlike the rest of their forces nearby. Reika pondered over her second suggestion. Her small company was considered one of the best and most disciplined military units of their village. But they, like other shinobi, had been aware that the Azukage had taken a lot of young children for the sake of a special program. A program with the objective of making super soldiers who could safeguard Azu's interests under any circumstances and against all odds. Captain Reika didn't doubt those kids would be undergoing horrific training, even. She had been one of the minority who objected to this program. What good were the shinobi of their village if their little children were forced to become K-machines? But the higher-ups had won and the program had started. She could only hope something good could come out of this entire disaster. "Stay alert. Whatever the enemy may be, S or otherwise, it is our job to defend this hill and we will defend it," confirmed Reika in her ironclad voice, making the younger man straighten up and offer a respectful nod. Just then, one of their runners responsible for maintaining communication active between the patrol squads on the sea coast and the trench lines came running towards them. Reika narrowed her eyes on seeing the panic in the man's eyes. "Report," she commanded. "We have lost contact with our patrols near the sea," reported the man hurriedly and with some hesitance. She immediately took out her magnifying glass from her back pocket and knelt nearby the hilltop. Zooming in, she focused on the twin trench lines at the bottom of the hill and stiffened when a wall of dark smoke began to charge from the lost sea lines towards the trenches. She frowned when she saw how thick the incoming smoke was and horror gripped her heart. "Take cover." Her booming voice was barely heard by the troops in the trenches before the smoke suddenly ignited, sending a crushing shockwave that sent each ninja in the first trench line sailing away. The second line had seen the fate of their comrades and were barely able to duck and were starting to get buried under the dust and dirt that flied everywhere. The fires raged wildly across the open field between the trench lines and the sea. It was then that she heard a whistling sound and her eyes widened when she saw great fireballs sailing through the sky right towards the last remaining trench line. The fires in the battlefield S down and Reika caught a first glimpse of her enemy. The first one she saw was a young teenager wearing a dark black full-sleeved shirt and same-colored pants complemented by similar shade of combat boots. To her surprise, he was wearing a similar colored armor with faint blue lines. His entire face was covered by a full-fledged gas mask and his eyes were protected by combat glasses. He looked to be heavily armed with twin swords at his back, several pouches containing explosives, kunai, shuriken, smoke bombs and even medical kits attached across his vest. All of these equipment gave him a lethal edge over her lightly armed company of ninjas. But that also made him more slower, however in the cover of the night he looked absolutely dangerous. More and more of similarly dressed troops appeared on the horizon until Reika saw they were a full company size. More than 120. Her gaze immediately caught sight of the only one that looked different in the entire enemy force. He was dressed in similar gear with the only difference being he was wearing a full white-sleeved shirt under his black-colored armor. Rest of his gear was the same as his comrades. Reika couldn't help but have a feeling he was the commander of these invaders. She flinched when the fireballs that were previously sailing towards the second trench line crashed and made her troops again seek cover, while few tried to deflect the attacks with water-style defensive moves. Her gut feeling was proven correct when she saw the operative wearing a white-sleeved shirt make a few unfamiliar hand signs that were keenly watched by his entire company. Reika cursed when one of the operatives stepped forward surrounded by a platoon-sized group. He immediately unleashed the dark smoke from his body that surged towards her fortified foxholes across the hill while his comrades unleashed giant fireballs in the sky that sailed forward and rained dangerously close to the second trench line where those of her troops that were not knocked out of the fight were still trying to hold on. It was then the enemy commander unleashed his sword and charged forward. Reika gasped when most of his force followed after him while the smoke-releasing ninja and his platoon continued to provide suppressing fire over the trench line with fireballs and obscuring the vision of the troops over the hill with the same smoke, but her source of astonishment was not their advance itself but the sheer speed. Nobody that heavily armed and armored could move that fast, but if her estimation was any correct then each of those soldiers was charging in at nearly 50 kilometers per hour. Sensors, pinpoint their locations. The rest of you stop that advance. She yelled furiously. Her trench troops and those across the hill were pinned by enemy tactics, that only left her with those present at the hilltop to counterattack. They understood the gravity of the situation and quickly got to work. Within seconds, their sensor-based ninjas gave the exact coordinates of the charging enemy making a small squad of Junin step forward. Together, they unleashed a storm of kunai and explosives in the air that rushed towards the charging enemy force. 10 of them leapt high into the air, higher than any shinobi ever could, and unleashed destructive gusts of wind and fireballs that neutralized the attack by Reika's troops completely. In the meantime, the rest of the attacking force had broken through the first neutralized trench line and jumped across the second one. Her disarrayed troops soon came face to face in close-quarter combat. Reika would never forget the sight of watching a full-fledged Junin get sent sailing away by the punch of a mere teenager. Another's fist was caught by a female enemy Kanoiki and with a flick she made the entire arm twist at painful angles. The enemy commander himself punched 2 of her Junin into unconsciousness within 3 seconds. Meanwhile the artillery group that had stayed in the rear had now shifted their attack across the positions over the hill while their main force finished neutralizing the Azu shinobi in the trench lines with ease. Despite her best efforts, Reika could only watch position after position fall under few minutes until she and her small group of ninjas on the hilltop were all that were left of her force. Her only solace being the fact that none of her ninjas were K, some were more injured than others but nothing a few days of medical care could not solve. She didn't want to imagine their fate if these shinobi had been real enemies instead of allies practicing in a planned exercise. Having seen firsthand how fast, strong and sharp these troops were along with their war strategies and the perfect sense of coordination, Reika surrendered with her men instead of getting into any more dangerous fights with these troops. Her decision was accepted with a firm nod from the enemy commander before he planted a black flag having 2 swords sewn against each other in the dark fabric over the hilltop. The enemy commander then touched one of his troops and whispered much to Reika's surprise in a very young boy's voice. Captain Fox to base, hilltop secured under 15 minutes. How copy? Asked the now identified captain. He must have received the response he wanted as he nodded in silence before turning back towards her. Reika was unable to hide her surprise or her respect for these soldiers. Not even the best Junin from Azu could have accomplished what they had in such little time without any single casualty. How many such exercises have you been through? She couldn't help but ask, making the enemy commander look at her. Just this one. Reika could not help but be left speechless, and the same feeling was present on the faces of her men as well as they stared at these young kids in a new light. You're lying, accused one of the Chunin. That is your opinion. We told you the fact that your leader asked for, that's all, finished the enemy captain, leaving little room for further questioning. He then turned towards Reika only to thump, his right hand turned into a firm fist against his sea right over his heart. His troops followed suit and mimicked the action, making her realize it was their own version of a salute. Reika and her men slowly got back on their feet, and when she offered a traditional salute in response, her men followed suit. Apologies if we were a little rough, said the enemy commander frankly. Reika chuckled in disbelief at those words, looking at the groaning and moaning ninjas around her and those below the hill in the trenches. Rough would be an understatement, but he was right, as this force only incapacitated her troops instead of dealing any permanent damage. What's the name of your unit, Captain? She asked with a faint smile. She watched as the entire enemy force vanished in a perfect shunshin, leaving behind their leader, who looked back at the Azu shinobi, and Reika had a feeling he was smiling behind that mask. The single worded answer he gave made her smile and would send shivers down the world in the future. Flashback end. He looked into Kushina's eyes and whispered, "Till the end." That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.